Imagine our global internet suddenly going dark. No news feeds, no shipping manifests, no warning. Then shift that dread back 3,200 years. Flames lick the royal palace of Hattusa. Clay tablets crack in the heat, releasing their secrets as ash into a darkening sky. In a moonlit harbor at Ugarit, dockworkers smell smoke on the wind and hear the distant thunder of unfamiliar oars. Along the rugged coasts of Canaan, merchants stare in horror at a horizon filled not with trading ships, but with black-prowed war galleys whose figureheads glint menacingly in the lightning of an approaching storm. And deep within the Lion Gate of Mycenae, proud Achaean kings barricade themselves behind Cyclopean walls, wondering why the grain ships have stopped coming, and why their vassals mutter about revolt. In palace corridors, the last messages are etched into clay as the air fills with the hiss of fire and the cries of a collapsing world. Scribes weep as they pack their tablets in linen. Priests whisper frantic prayers to distant gods, and warriors stand helpless before an enemy they cannot see. Famine, fear, and chaos. Beneath the grandeur, uncertainty spreads like rot through oak beams. In the span of a single human lifetime, around 1200 BC, the interconnected world of the Late Bronze Age simply stops. The enemy is upon us. My ships are lost. The city is aflame. Fragment from Amurapi of Ugarit to the King of Cyprus, circa 1190 BC. Welcome to History Crossroads, where the past is never truly buried. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and ring the bell so you never miss the mysteries that still echo through time. Let's begin. A world at its peak. By 1250 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean glittered with superpowers. Egypt under the Ramesside pharaohs, the Hittite Empire ruling Anatolia, the Mycenaean city-states of Greece, and mercantile ports such as Ugarit, Tyre, and Byblos. What truly bound this mosaic together was motion, raw materials, letters, people, and ideas flowing like arterial blood through a single economic heart. Bronze weapons left Cypriot foundries and re-emerged as tribute in Mycenaean storerooms. Cedar trunks floated from Lebanon to Egypt to hold aloft palace roofs painted lapis blue. Clay letters addressed foreign monarchs as brother, demanding safe passage for caravans, bearing lapdogs for queens, and tin for swordsmiths. Chariots squealed across limestone plazas, their bronze-clad wheels sending up sparks as they rounded palace courtyards. Inside the storerooms, scribes tallied grain down to the last bushel, their styluses scratching meticulously across wet clay. Merchants returned home, bearing gold and tales of foreign markets, while soldiers moved with military precision across roads protected by alliances inked in cuneiform. Temples rang with hymns in Akkadian, Hittite, and Egyptian tongues. Diplomats dined on imported figs while debating matters of state in scroll-lit banquet halls. A vivid time capsule survives in the Uluburan shipwreck. Copper and tin ingots stacked beside Canaanite glass, Nubian ivory, and Baltic amber, proof that a single merchant could thread 3 continents without ever leaving Bronze Age trade routes. Those cargoes fed the era's most sophisticated weapons platform, the 2-man chariot, swift as thunder, lethal with composite bows, yet ruinously expensive. Overseeing it all were tireless scribes whose styluses skated across wet clay, turning palaces into humming nerve centers of diplomacy and commerce. The system was brilliant, intricate, and, as events would soon show, perilously fragile. Gathering storms. Tree ring cores from Anatolia and pollen samples from Galilee whisper of a tightening drought that began around 1225 BC. Less rain meant thin harvests. Thin harvests bred famine. Famine stirred unrest. On the empire's fringes, restless tribes pressured borders already frayed by royal tax collectors. In Hatti, clay tablets warn of provinces refusing grain quotas, while Egyptian scribes complain that Apiru bandits plundered storehouses. Migrants followed the scent of food the way iron follows a lodestone, and rulers responded by raising taxes for armies they could scarcely afford. That, in turn, triggered more resentment among the peasantry. Grain storage collapsed under locust swarms and poorly timed floods, further driving unrest. Soon, it wasn't only foreign threats. They came from within, as vassals, governors, and even brothers turned against one another in competition for dwindling resources. Messages from diplomats took longer to arrive. Promised goods went missing en route. Merchants started carrying spears along with scales. Tax collectors vanished into the wilderness, never to return. Each decision tugged another thread from the tapestry. When one provincial governor withheld grain from a neighboring region to protect his own stores, local alliances fractured, and armed raids followed within weeks. The once interlocked system of trade and tribute began to fray. The warning signs were clear, but too vast, too fast, and too unfamiliar to address in time. The Sea People's Strike. In 1207 BC, Pharaoh Meneptah boasted of crushing an alliance of marauders he called the Sea Peoples. Yet the respite was brief. They returned in force under Ramses III in 1177 BC, attacking Cyprus, ravaging Ugarit, and finally assaulting Egypt itself. At that very moment, tree ring data and Nile flood records reveal a deepening drought across the eastern Mediterranean. So the Sea Peoples struck precisely when granaries were emptying and armies were already rationing bread. Ramses III's Medinet Habu reliefs show ox-drawn carts packed with women and children. This was no lightning raid, but a slow-moving migration driven by desperation. The carved scenes show chaos, infantry clashing on the shores, archers firing from fortified boats, and civilians trailing behind, carrying bundles of possessions on their backs. This was not just an army, it was an exodus with spears. Excavated coastal cities from Ashkelon to Ugarit display the same horror: burned beams, smashed pottery, toppled walls. In Ugarit, the attack came so suddenly that letters pleading for help remained unfired in their kilns, as if the scribes themselves had dropped everything and run. The destruction layers are thick and violent, often mingled with the remains of collapsed structures and carbonized organic material. As for who these Sea Peoples were, theories abound. The most widely supported modern theory suggests they were a confederation of displaced groups from the Aegean and Western Anatolia, possibly including Mycenaeans and Luwians, driven by famine, drought, and internal collapse. Other theories link them to regions like Sicily, Sardinia, and even the Balkans. Their weapons, pottery, and even hairstyles, preserved in Egyptian reliefs, suggest a patchwork of cultures moving together under shared necessity. Their impact is beyond dispute. They tore at the seams of an already strained world. Linguists trace hints of their languages in Sardinia, Sicily, and even inland Anatolia. Archaeologists note changes in ceramic styles, house structures, and burial customs that mirror the movements of these groups. Their sails became legends, their memory a warning etched in charred ruins. Nature's fury. Even as coastal defenses burned, the earth itself convulsed. Geologist Amos Nuhr identifies a chain of earthquakes between 1225 BC and 1175 BC that toppled walls from Troy to Tel Megiddo. Diagonal cracks in Mycenaeans' fortifications still record the tremors. Cities built on fault lines suffered cascading collapses, their defensive structures crumbling overnight. Granaries buckled, wells were buried, roads became impassable. At the same time, drought worsened. Lake Tiberias shrank to record lows, and crop pollen virtually disappears from Levantine sediments, suggesting widespread agricultural collapse. Tree rings from Anatolia confirm a prolonged period of aridity. Egyptian papyri lament pestilence in Hatti, hinting that disease, possibly smallpox or bubonic plague, moved along trade routes already disrupted by war. Human remains from some sites show signs of malnutrition and sudden trauma, suggesting starvation combined with violence. Entire provinces were isolated by landslides, broken aqueducts, and the failure of crucial irrigation systems. Herds died off in the dust. Grain shipments failed. Villages vanished, not in fire, but in famine. Entire populations likely relocated or perished without leaving much trace. Climate and catastrophe moved hand in hand. When nature and nomads strike together, resilience erodes to dust. And when people cannot flee, they turn inward, against neighbors, rulers, even the gods themselves. Shrines were sacked by desperate hands. Sacred images defaced. Wheat fields lay fallow as farmers joined militias or wandered in search of sustenance. The gods grew silent, the skies darker. Faith fractured alongside foundations. Hope itself became another casualty of the long collapse. Systems collapse. A palace economy is a Jenga tower. Remove the wrong block, and everything topples. The Late Bronze Age was built upon fragile infrastructure masked by its grandeur, an intricate web of resources, rituals, and relationships. Bronze, the essential metal for weapons and tools, required both copper and tin, often sourced from distant lands. Disrupt either leg of that supply chain, and everything halted. Slag analysis shows Cypriot copper output plunged by 90% within a single generation. At the same time, access to tin from as far away as modern-day Afghanistan became unreliable. Without these vital imports, the manufacturing of weapons and tools ground to a near standstill. Caravans that once traversed safe, treaty-protected roads were now ambushed. Merchant fleets disappeared, grain shipments vanished, and palace scribes, who functioned not only as accountants but as the nervous system of these economies, simply had no stock to allocate. With storerooms emptied and ledgers blank, the economy seized. Linear B tablets from Pylos, once used to meticulously track goods, abruptly list chariot parts and military rations as if rushed in panic, a logistical scramble before collapse. The very bureaucracy that had made these civilizations stable became a burden. These institutions, once central to palace life, were too centralized, too rigid, too dependent on distant imports to weather local or regional shocks. When palace officials were removed, everything beneath them crumbled. Robert Drews argues that the spread of cost-effective iron blades among decentralized infantry forces gave rise to a new kind of warfare, less about elite chariot formations and more about nimble foot soldiers who could operate independently. Whether or not iron alone toppled the chariot lords, it marked a fundamental shift in military power. Meanwhile, trust in the divine kingship eroded. Once believed to be gods on earth, kings were now blamed for failing harvests, invasions, and societal unrest. As loyalty shifted from monarch to clan or community, the bonds that held the old world together dissolved. Literacy, a hallmark of centralized palace administration, faded with the destruction of archives and the loss of scribes. The loss wasn't merely economic, it was epistemological. Knowledge systems collapsed. Histories were no longer recorded, but remembered. In the end, it wasn't just economies that fell. It was identities, cultures, entire worldviews. The palaces that once shimmered as symbols of divinity and order fell quiet, their stones cooling beneath the sun, their walls overtaken by weeds. What remained was silence, a silence that would last for centuries. Cities in ashes, a chronicle of collapse. Ugarit, About 1190 BC, once a bustling cosmopolitan port brimming with trade from Egypt, Anatolia, and beyond, Ugarit fell in an instant. Archaeologists discovered letters hastily etched onto clay tablets, some still inside kilns, not yet fired, pleading for aid from allies who would never come. The city was incinerated so quickly that scribes didn't have time to finish their messages. Charred walls and collapsed temples marked the end of what had been a cultural and diplomatic hub. Hattusa, about 1180 BC, capital of the mighty Hittite Empire, with stone lions guarding its gates and libraries filled with thousands of cuneiform tablets, became a ghost city. Its archives were smashed, the palatial quarters reduced to rubble. The Hittite Empire vanished from history for over 3,000 years, its capital buried and forgotten until rediscovered by archaeologists in the early 20th century. No records tell of its final days, only the eerie absence of continuity where once the great kings ruled. Mycenae and Pylos, about 1175 BC. The twin bastions of Mycenaean Greece met a similar fate. Fires consumed their palatial complexes, and their famed Linear B tablets, used to track trade, taxes, and inventories, vanished from the historical record. The collapse of these centers signaled the beginning of Greece's Dark Age, a period marked by the disappearance of writing, monumental architecture, and long-distance trade for nearly 400 years. Even Egypt, though it survived Ramses III's naval victory against the Sea Peoples, emerged battered and diminished. Its reach contracted, its economy strained, and it lost control over many of its northern territories. The great monuments still stood, but the empire's vitality had been permanently sapped. Other lesser-known cities followed suit, and Comar in Cyprus was burned, rebuilt, and burned again before being finally abandoned. Megiddo, famed for its strategic hilltop location, showed layers of ash and destruction, a witness to multiple waves of violence. The trade networks of Alashia, once central to the bronze economy, dissolved into obscurity. The fire wasn't always literal. In many places, the silence of decline was slow, suffocating. Shrines became barns, markets became empty squares, and sometimes the collapse wasn't noticed until generations later, when descendants realized they no longer knew how to read the scripts their ancestors once carved into stone. It was a lull so deep, it took centuries to grasp what had truly been lost. Into the dark. For nearly 300 years after 1175 BC, the grand correspondence between kings falls silent. The rhythmic diplomacy that once linked palaces from Thebes to Hattusa gives way to a long, unsettling quiet. Populations shrink, literacy fades, and trade networks collapse into local barter economies. Villages rise where palace centers once ruled, their mud-brick homes clustered around subsistence fields instead of thrones. Iron quietly supplants bronze, not in grand forges, but in backyard kilns and hilltop smithies. Oral storytellers later reforge memory into myth, preserving fragments of the past in tales that blur history with legend. The Iliad, composed centuries later, remembers the age of heroes fighting before walls already lost to time. Yet collapse is not obliteration. From the ashes rise the Greek polis, the Phoenician maritime diaspora, and, eventually, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Decline plants seeds as well as graves. The new societies that emerge are leaner, more adaptive. Rather than rebuild the palaces, they invent city councils. Rather than centralize, they localize. Pottery styles evolve and diversify, reflecting not imperial taste, but regional flair. Iron smelting techniques spread gradually, shaping tools as much as weapons. Religious beliefs begin to reshape themselves in smaller, more intimate communities, emphasizing local gods and household rituals over distant temples and elite priesthoods. The world didn't end. It was simply rebooting. In silence, it reinvented itself. Small settlements formed kinship networks. These grassroots alliances laid the foundation for emerging power structures, giving rise to early city-states governed not by divine monarchs, but by councils of elders, warrior leaders, or influential families rooted in local traditions. Some formed defensive leagues, others created market hubs, and a few evolved into thriving ports or sacred centers. Local leaders rose not from royal blood, but from community respect, merit, and strategic kinship ties. Oral law replaced written decree. Myth became memory's anchor. The new age would not be a continuation, but a reckoning. The smoking guns, debating the causes. Scholars square off like detectives at a crime scene, poring over fragmented evidence and contrasting interpretations. One school argues that invasion was the primary driver of collapse. The Sea Peoples, they claim, were not just opportunistic migrants, but a coordinated military threat, capable of toppling cities and empires. Their arrival disrupted not just defense, but communication and trade, essential lifelines of Bronze Age stability. Others point to climate and seismic shifts. Droughts reduced crop yields, while earthquakes crumbled defenses and cut off water supplies. This environmental fragility, they argue, created a domino effect, destabilizing agriculture, forcing migrations, and triggering rebellions from within. The very ground beneath these ancient societies was no longer trustworthy. Systems theorists present a different lens, one of complexity. These civilizations had become so interconnected, so reliant on mutual trade and administrative cooperation, that they became brittle. A single stressor could not be contained. When Cyprus stopped shipping copper, Egypt couldn't forge weapons. When food didn't arrive in Ugarit, revolts ignited. In a system of interlocking gears, one jam meant the whole mechanism failed. Meanwhile, technological change loomed in the form of iron. Easier to source and forge than bronze, iron allowed peripheral tribes to arm themselves without relying on elite trade networks. That democratization of weaponry destabilized the aristocratic balance of power, making once dominant chariot lords vulnerable to iron-wielding infantry. Each explanation sharpens the picture, but the likeliest culprit is not a single villain, but a perfect storm of pressures, a convergence of invasions, droughts, earthquakes, economic stress, and evolving warfare. Multiple stresses detonated in tragic synchronization. A domino doesn't fall by itself. It's nudged, shaken, and finally pushed over the edge. Complexity, unchecked, became its own undoing. Modern parallels abound, from our global supply chains and climate instability to increasingly fragile diplomatic alliances. The Bronze Age collapse reminds us that the higher a civilization climbs on interdependence, the harder it falls when links begin to snap. We stand, perhaps unknowingly, on a similar precipice. Echoes and lessons for today. Why linger among ruins? Because every headline about supply chain fragility, mega drought, or climate refugee carries an echo of the late Bronze Age. The ancients survived by adapting. Craftsmen learned to forge iron locally. Farmers diversified crops. New city-states redesigned governance around citizen militias rather than elite chariot arms. Resilience lay in decentralization and innovation. The palace system failed, but the village endured. Their cautionary tale is also a blueprint. Diversify resources, plan for shocks. Remember that prosperity can hide weakness like silk over rusted chainmail. What feels like the end is often just a reckoning, and perhaps a new beginning. Just as COVID-19 exposed the vulnerabilities of global supply chains and energy crises test our infrastructure, so too Did the late Bronze Age unravel from multiple interconnected shocks? Collapse is not a meteor, it is a mirror, and through it, we glimpse the vulnerabilities of our own systems: economic, political, environmental. The past doesn't repeat, it instructs. The city lights of our modern world feel permanent, yet so did the torchlit palaces of Hattusa. If this journey through the ancient apocalypse fascinated you, please like the video, share it with curious friends, and most importantly, tap subscribe so you never miss another trek along History Crossroads. Until next time, keep exploring the crossroads of history, where the past warns, inspires, and surprises us every day.